Hello, and welcome to BCDI Colorado's Bright Beginnings Resilience from the Start, a podcast created to equipping parents, caregivers, and educators on the tools they need to help children thrive. I'm your host and president, Jalen Taylor, and I am so glad that you joined us today. This month, we're diving into an important, pivotal, and timely topic pulled directly from NBCDI's 8 Essential Outcomes. We'll be talking about that all children should attend a school that affirms and expands them. Today, we'll explore strategies to create and advocate for affirming educational spaces, featuring insights from our incredible guest, Dr. Franita Ware. Dr. Ware is a thought leader, educator, and advocate whose work focuses on warm demander pedagogy and radical self care. Her innovative approach helps educators disrupt biases, foster culturally responsive practices, and create environments that empower both students and their communities. But before we get started here, a little background on why this topic is so crucial. Well, research has shown us that students who feel affirmed in their identities perform better academically, build stronger relationships, and are more engaged in their learning environments. However, systemic inequities often hinder the creation of these spaces. That's why leaders like Dr. Ware are pivotal, not only in inspiring change, but providing actionable tools to make it happen. So let's get into it. Join me in welcoming Dr. Franita Ware to the show. All right. Hello, Dr. Ware, and welcome to Bright Beginnings, Resilience from the Start. We are so glad to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you
Yeah,
for
of
having me as
course.
a
We've
guest.
had a couple of conversations, and I feel like I have learned so much from you. And I thought, why not bring this to our community and to our listeners? And so, before we really get into the meat of our conversation, I want to start by helping our listeners get to know you better. So, my first question for you is: can you share
Okay.
a little bit about your background and how you became passionate to education, specifically equitable and culturally responsive teachings?
I'm
Hmm.
originally from Atlanta. I'm living in Denver now. I've lived in Denver twice. I went back to Atlanta and got the calling to go into education. In the culturally responsive teaching literature, historically, people like me get a calling, and I definitely did. I was in my third career when I got an education. I had been a commercial artist, which I wanted
Hmm.
to do and loved, but education called my name. And once I got into education, then I started to understand the historical context of Black people in education. And what we did was called culturally responsive education. I was fortunate to be with Dr. Jacqueline Jordan Irvine at Emory University, receiving my
Hmm.
doctorate, where she was making sure the documentation of culturally responsive education was happening because we were already starting to see a shift in the population of Black teachers and teachers who knew about culturally
Hmm.
responsive education. And it was also there that I learned about warm demander
Mm.
teachers, and
It
I
just
just
blossomed from
knew.
there.
I knew that was it. When I read, yeah, when I read about it, it went from there. I published an article in 2006 that in 2025 is
Hmm.
still being cited, and recently published a book, my baby, Warm Demander Teachers, Healthy, Whole, and
Hmm.
Transformational, that continued the work from 2006. And one of the Warm Demander teachers who I researched has a quote in the last chapter of the book, and I'm on her dissertation committee. She's
Oh,
getting her doctorate
wow.
right now. So it's a
Yeah.
real thing. It's not just something I
Yeah.
decided to do. It's not like buying a dress. It is a commitment to the work moving forward to make sure that we educate, and I call the students our students, to make sure our students are
And I think
educated
that's
more.
great. And we are so thankful that you answered the call. But I think what's great in the story that you said is you're
Thank you.
also creating an ecosystem for other people to expand on this work beyond what you've done, what the people before you have done. And I think that is
Yes.
great. And so before we move further into talking about your book and your work directly, some
Okay.
of our listeners may not know what warm demander pedagogy is or what some of your work in radical self care is. So, could you give us a brief explanation of these concepts and how they influence your work?
Brief on two babies. Okay, here we go. The first baby. Warm Demander Teachers is a specific pedagogy. When I first published the article in 2006, people thought it was the classroom management type of program. They wanted me to come and do workshops to basically tell them how to get these
Hmm.
black children in control, basically. Um, and so I had to let them know that it was a really concrete pedagogy built in what I called at the time cultural responsive inquiry, but now it's now called cultural responsive inquiry. It was cultural responsive constructivism. And so it's a way of engaging students, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some more. But it is a phenomenal way of teaching students, and the proof is in the fact that people are still citing the articles, and people have expanded the work. Other authors have used the work and used the term, um, but mine is the work that shows not just you should become a warm demander teacher, but how you get there. And the first step in getting there is to do radical self
Mm.
care. I wrote radical self care in 2016 when I thought I
Mm.
had a stroke. And I went to the doctor. Clearly, I had not. And guess what the doctor said? I was stressed. And so I literally said on my sofa, I've got to do something radical to get out of this. So I knew an occasional massage or getting my nails done was not going to get it. Radical self care is not something you go get done, it is not a service. The service is the icing on the cake. Radical self care, and this is what I learned over time continuing to do the work, after I learned it, got nerdy with brain
Mm.
health and brain science and how to rewire your brain. I'm like that nerd now, proudly. Um, but I learned how to do one small step consistently, like the step, as small a step as you can so that you experience success. That starts to rewire your brain, and that sets into motion all these multiple chains of reaction so that your health expands. The internal negative comments, or I call the internal critic, that's always saying you can't do
Hmm.
that, you can't do that. You rewire that to where it's like, yes, you can. You did your water every day, do that. And so it comes from consistent small steps you do every day to take care of yourself. If you miss a day, it's like, well, what did I do yesterday? I drank water, good enough. And so it's always this encouragement of moving forward, and then your brain literally will take over and expand into all parts of your life, your relationships, your professional skills, your ability to stay calm
Hmm.
in the moment of just
Yeah.
outrageousness. And so those are the two bodies of work that I had put together to create this book on
Hmm.
living.
And it's been some phenomenal work just in my, research and the things that you've shared with me when it came to the radical self healing, right? And just for instance, there, yes, radical
Radical
self
self
care,
care.
excuse me. Um, it
It
is
is healing,
healing. I
healing.
have seen how that has been
You
healing,
got
but
that
there was
right.
one step where you were like, you
Yes.
have to celebrate the small things. And I was like, wow, even in that,
Yes.
has been
Yes.
transformational. And how does that then impact my work within my conversations with other teachers and caregivers and people to try to do some of
Mm-hmm.
this work?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so now that we've
Yeah.
gotten a little bit better, clearer picture of what those two bodies of work are for you, you've done a lot of work
Mm-hmm.
not only in research but on the ground, right, with districts in Denver. And
Yes.
so my question into diving into that work is, in your experience, what are some of the most significant challenges students and educators face when trying to create affirming and equitable learning environments?
I think the biggest challenge is first being well enough to self
Hmm.
analyze and self critique and look at the systems and structures in place in schools that harm
Hmm.
our students. And when I say our students, I mean BIPOC students, Black, Indigenous students of color.
Hmm.
Those are our students. And the first thing we have to do is get teachers to get a communal sense of these are our babies, these are my babies. And then you take a different sense of, and I'm going to make sure they're successful. One of the experiences I had in education was teachers saying, well, those students can't do
Mm.
that. And so it has, so that first shift is it has to go from those students to our students
Hmm.
and my babies. And not, and my babies are so difficult, but my babies have genius. My babies have potential. My babies are brilliant. My baby will say things that will make me burst out laughing because I never thought
Hmm.
about it that way. And so it's this synergy that's created between the student and the teacher that both of them benefit from and both of them blossom. But first, teachers have to do the radicals of care. They have to be well. They have to look at, what am I not doing with my students? What is the lack of cohesion in our relationship to create this type of genius that even the students don't know that exists? One of the things about warm demander teachers, they see your genius before you
Mm,
see it, and they let you
mhm,
know that it's there. And so they help you to discover who you are, not only through your cultural racial identity, but your genius as a student. And I call that the successful student learner identity. And so the warm demander teacher opens that up for the student. And think how powerful that is for the students who's always been told, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're not going to be successful, you're never going to, like, that student, when they have the teacher who says, are you kidding me? You're a
mm,
genius. And they treat them in class that way. They treat their comments in class like, I've never heard that before. That is amazing. Think about the shift that happens with that student. Think about the shift that happens with the teacher when they can say that honestly to a student, when their eyes can light up when they
mhm,
see the student. And so that's what has to happen to get to that type of relationship, to get to that type of academic achievement for students. It has to be this synergy, and has to be a well teacher looking at themselves and saying, what am I
mhm,
not doing? What could I do better? What could I do differently? It's not those students, they're my
mhm.
babies.
So it's taking ownership of the success of the children within your classroom, and taking
Yes,
pride in it, not
yes,
just ownership,
yes,
but
yes.
pride in the outcome
Oh,
that you're
yes,
setting them up
yes,
for their future.
yes,
I think that's
yes.
phenomenal.
Yes, and if you look at the cover of the book, you see a black teacher standing in the back, and the student is at the board
Hmm.
co-teaching. And the look of pride on his face, that's a warm demander teacher. So that's stock photography. I didn't take that photograph. I am a photographer. Um, and I could have hired one of my friends to do it. But when I
That was
found that, I was
it.
like, this says it. This is the image. The teacher's in the background, but smiling like, look
Mm.
at my baby. That's my baby doing that work. And the whole class is paying
Mm-hmm.
attention to that
No,
student.
that is, yeah. The cover of the book is phenomenal, and I can't wait to for some people to get their hands on it as well. I think when you talked about the level of
Yes.
awareness, right, you're talking about disrupting biases in the classroom. In your work,
Yes.
can you share a
Yes.
very practical example of how an educator did this effectively um, with you?
Well, the book was written not just as content, but it also has professional development activities through each chapter, so people can stop and pause and think about what's been written, think about what's been
Hmm.
asked of them to do. And one of the things I ask teachers to do is examine their own cultural racial identity. And I believe, because of the intersectionality of culture, race, and identity, we have to look at that, and not just
Hmm.
ethnicity and race. We have to look at all those pieces. And so I start with, I don't start, but in one of the chapters, I ask the teachers, look at your own cultural racial identity. And a lot of teachers will say, oh, I don't have culture.
Hmm.
That's something those people have. And I know, and I've had to graciously
Yeah.
say, yes, you do. And the way I unpack that is like, so do you celebrate Christmas? Okay, that's an
Hmm.
indicator of culture. Do you get to open a Christmas present the evening before, or you have to wait till that day? That's another indicator of culture. Is there a big family dinner, or do you go get Chinese food? Like, all those indicators are indicators of culture. And so I tell people, that's your family culture. Now look at how your family culture influence you and your thinking. Have you maintained that? Do you celebrate Christmas? Getting people to just really unpack things that they don't think are
Hmm.
observable, but they really are. And so getting people to look at that, looking at how their race intersects with that. Identity is who we say
Mm.
we are. And I like to add, and it can't be in harm or disservice to other